Okay, an eclipse. Okay, when an object in space comes between the sun and a third object, we have it casts a shadow on the third object. This is called eclipse. There are, as you know, two types of eclipses: solar eclipse or solar eclipses and lunar eclipses. Look at this image. Look here. These are the two main types, or two types of eclipses. The first eclipse is called solar eclipse. بالعربي معناه كسوف الشمس. طيب, what is the meaning of solar eclipse? How does solar eclipse happen? First, look at the solar eclipse. This is the sun, this is the earth, and this is the moon. So, solar eclipse happens when the moon is in between earth and sun. As you see, this is the moon's shadow on earth. In these areas or these regions, we have a solar eclipse. So this image or this page is very important because it explains for you the solar eclipse and the lunar eclipse. Okay, so the solar eclipse or a solar eclipse occurs when the moon passes directly between earth and the sun, blocking sun's light. So it blocks sunlight to reach earth. So when the moon passes directly between the earth and the sun, we have a solar eclipse. The shadow of the moon is then cast on earth. From earth, the sun appears covered and is dark like this, with only the corona showing. يعني look, زي كأنه واحد اجى غطى الشمس. Okay, solar eclipse, look, can only happen during a new moon, because as we mentioned in the moon phases, during the new moon, the moon is in between earth and the sun. So this is very important to know that solar eclipse can only happen during the new moon. It is impossible for the solar eclipse to happen, for example, in the first quarter or in the third quarter or in the full moon. It may happen, or when the solar eclipse happens, it happens only when during the new moon. What about the lunar eclipse? Now in the lunar eclipse, as you see, now in this case, the earth between the sun and the moon. So it casts, or the shadow of earth comes on the moon. So you don't see the moon. The light of the moon is blocked and you see the moon like this. So a lunar eclipse, this image, these pictures help you to understand the lunar and solar eclipse. Now we are talking about the lunar eclipse. Occurs during a full moon. Notice, lunar eclipses occur during a full moon because in the full moon phase, Earth is in the middle between the moon and the sun. Okay? When Earth is directly between the moon and the sun. Okay, during lunar eclipse, Earth blocks sunlight. Earth blocks sunlight from reaching the moon. Lunar eclipses occur only when there is a full moon, as it is mentioned above, because the moon is closest to Earth's shadow at that time. طيب. So this is the lunar and the solar eclipses. There is something also very important to know, that every month we have new moon and full moon, but eclipses do not occur or happen every month. Of course, we don't have eclipses every month. Okay, The plane, why? Because the plane of Moon's orbit around Earth is off by about 5 degrees from the plane of Earth's orbit around the Sun. During most months, the shadow cast by Earth or the Moon misses the other object. So we don't have eclipses every month. Even we have a full moon and a new moon every month. Now we have two regions of the, or two types, we can say مش two types, يعني two regions of darkness. The area of the very darkest part of the shadow is called umbra. Umbra, okay? During an eclipse, the very darkest part of the shadow where the light from the sun is completely blocked is called the umbra, okay? And people within this area, within the umbra, experience a total solar eclipse, okay? Now in the penumbra, we have the area of the shadow where the sun is only partially blocked is called penumbra. Penumbra, okay? During a solar eclipse, people in the penumbra see only a partial eclipse. The last topic on this subject, and this topic, sorry, the last subject in this lesson, tides. What are tides? Simply, tides are rise and fall of the ocean water that occur approximately every 20.5 hours. Or simply, we have two high tides and two low tides every 24 hours at any given location. Okay? Fine. So the rise and fall of the ocean is called tide. طبعا اللي عمره راح على بحر ممكن يشوف هذا الاشي. Whenever you go to the ocean or to any sea, you can see tides, low, high tide and low tide every day. طيب. What causes the tides, or why we have tides? Because of the gravity of the sun and the moon. But the tides are caused mainly by the gravity of the moon, because the moon is very close to Earth. As the moon rotates around Earth, it exerts a force of gravity on the oceans. Okay? So the moon's gravity pulls more strongly on the side of the Earth facing the moon. Okay? Sorry, نسيت أحكي, tides result from the gravitational differences in how Earth, the moon, and the sun interact at different alignments. The water rises for about 6 hours, then falls about 6 hours. Right. The moon's gravity pulls more strongly on the side of the Earth facing the moon. Yani areas that faces the moon or close to the moon are these areas we have a high tide. This pull causes the ocean water to bulge on that side of Earth. Also, another bulge forms on the side of Earth that is farther from the moon, where the moon's pull is weakest. This causes the formation of high tides in both locations and low tides in between. As Earth rotates, the bulge shifts to remain oriented with the moon. As a result, a full rotation will result in, as I told you, two high tides and we have two high tides and two low tides at any given location every 24 hours. Right. Sun also plays a role on the tides. The sun also affects the ocean tides, even though the sun's gravitational pull on the Earth is much stronger than the moon's, but the sun is so far away. For this reason, the gravitational force of the sun has a little effect on the tides. It has an effect, but it's not like the moon. Type, we have two types of, generally, we have two types of tides. What are they? Spring tide and neap tide. Can anyone tell me what is the difference between them? يلا تشوفكم دارسين ولا لا. What is the difference between spring tide and neap tide? First, the spring tide, the difference between the high tide and the low tide, we have a significant difference between the consecutive high tide and low tide. Okay? Notice something very important. Spring tide occurs either in the new moon or the full moon. Yani spring tides happen always in the full moon and the new moon. In both cases, in the full moon or the new moon, the sun, the earth, earth, moon, and sun line up. So the gravitational force of the sun and moon in the same line, so they exert a large force of gravity. For this reason, we have a tide with a significant difference between the consecutive low and high tides, called a spring tide. Look at this table, for example. Here, as you see, the largest difference, this is a high tide and this is a low tide in a specific location in different days: November 21, November 23, November 25, November 20. Notice that the difference
ترى
between
حتجيب لنا هيك شيء.
لا النمبرز هذول جدول، بس انه you must distinguish between nip tide and the spring tide. So as you see, the high tide is 116.8 centimeters, while here it's 10.2, which is the largest or maximum difference. This is a spring tide, while here it is a neap tide, because the difference is the smallest. So again, when the gravitational pulls from both the sun and moon combine to produce a tide with the most significant difference between consecutive low and high tides. When does this happen? During the new moon or the full moon, because the three objects, earth, sun, and moon, are on the same line. Okay? During the new moon or the full moon phases, the gravitational pulls of both the sun and the moon combine to produce a tide with the most significant difference between the consecutive low and high tides. It's called spring tide. On the other hand, a nip tide is a tide with least difference between the consecutive low and high tides. Nip tides happens during the first quarter or the third quarter. Okay, in the first quarter moon and third quarter moon, we have a nip tide, which means a low tide, least difference between the consecutive high and low tide. Look, why? Because the moon, earth, and sun make their gravitation. The moon and the sun exerts a gravitational pull on different directions, so they cancel each other. Okay, either in the third quarter or in the first quarter. Look, during the moon's first quarter and third quarter phases, the line between earth and the sun is at a right angle, as you see, like this. Look, it is at a right angle. The moon, earth, and sun together make a right angle during the first quarter and the third quarter. So the line between earth and the sun is at right angle to the line between earth and the moon, because the sun and the moon are pulling in different directions. Their gravitational pulls partially cancel each other. So this arrangement produces a more moderate tide. Yani low tide. It's called nip tide. A nip tide is a tide with the least difference between consecutive low and high tides. This is everything about the topic 9. Let us talk about the exam in more details. يعني nothing special about the final exam. Just it is 40 marks. It is like the first and the second, the same thing. it made up 4 parts, as I remember, 4 or 5 parts. I don't remember 4 or 5 parts. The first part, as you know, multiple choice, and the majority of the exam multiple choice. We have part 2, part 3, part 4, and part 5. You have to explain some things, but it's not difficult. Okay, so exam, the final exam, it is the same as the first and the second, but it is from out of 40 marks. It is very easy, inshallah, especially if you study well. And when you, of course, attending this revision is good for you, because this revision highlighted the most important things in the exam. I hope for you best wishes in the exam, and goodbye. Do you have any comment? Any question?
No, thank you, teacher.
طيب, thank you very much. وآسف جدا إني تأخرت عليكم. أنتوا بتناموا بدري صراحة ولا بتسهروا؟
لا عادي، استاذ، الوقت عادي.
يلا goodbye.
Goodbye.